One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, in addition to sort of the politics and what's going on with Labour right now and the recent elections, is what's going on in the UK. What are the biggest issues that you all are facing, everyday people? I know what they are in the United States, and I can only imagine it sort of mirrors this, but you guys might look at the United States and be like, they're more dystopian. We are just trying to hold on to maybe some of the good things. But you explain like what people are facing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose, the background in the United States is that you don't have such a strong welfare state that we do. But if you're looking at sort of
Exactly.
how Britain has changed over the past 10 or 20 years, we've had it worse than the United States. So in Britain over the past 10 to 20 years, median wages haven't risen. And this is a big reason why the Tories got completely destroyed, which is that wages are completely stagnant. Housing costs are incredibly high. So the price of houses has increased. And then add on to that sort of public services completely collapsing. So it was austerity we had from 2010 onwards. So we had a conservative Lib Dem government who basically just cut loads of money from public services. So that sort of depressed the economy a little bit, but also meant that the public services just deteriorated. Then we had, Brexit, which I wasn't sort of as passionate about as some of the sort of Uber Remainers in this country. But I think it is fair to say that that wasn't particularly helpful for the economy. Then COVID, Russia, all the sort of the hits that other countries have had, but because the Tory government had sort of just cut the public sector and public services to the bone, and we hadn't had any wage increases over the past 10 years, just meant, everyone is, well, I don't want to say everyone's miserable. I mean, we're in a heat wave at the moment. I mean, I was at a swimming pool today. Everyone was having a great time. I don't want to
Are
send
you in
this
your own
incredibly
bin?
dystopian message, but yeah, it's economically, the situation has been very dire. Sorry, what was your question?
No, I was referencing a very funny viral video of an Englishman sitting in a bin to cool off. I think it might have been
No,
staged, but have you not seen that? Am I on bin?
no,
I'm in my own
I
bin.
think I
Let me
have.
alone.
I think I have seen it. I'm not sure.
It's
I
the
was in
best.
maybe you might not have these in America. This is one of the things we benefit from. I was in like an outdoor pool which is run by the council, and it was just really lovely. Actually, it felt very much like this is what social democracy is supposed to be like. A little
We have
sliver of
public
it that
pools.
remains.
We have public
You
pools.
have
It's
public
just
pools.
it's mostly urine, but still like that it's nice, they
If you can
exist.
splash around, that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Well, I appreciate that because I do think it's just getting that background. What's interesting about Brexit and how it sort of plays in is that we're told in this country that once, Brexit ostensibly was to for the xenophobes stopping immigration because I only assume they're a drain on our resources. But then when the government cuts those resources for everyone, um, that sort of defeats this false purpose. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if you're like it's your programs of austerity that are screwing over these programs, not immigrants.
Well, also, what was very unhelpful for the Conservatives, so it's not a concern of mine, but for Conservative voters, they had a double whammy, which is that sort of, the Conservatives are supposed to have a reputation for economic competence. The fact that everything's crumbling and no one's wages have risen hasn't helped that. But then also we had the Liz Truss government, which did sort of manage to crash the economy in quite a silly way. But one of the other reasons why Conservative voters kind of abandoned the party is because we did Brexit in large part because lots of voters wanted to reduce migration. Obviously, I wasn't one of them. But many people expected then that we would leave the EU and that migration would fall. In fact, it doubled. So in 2021 and 2022, we had the highest levels of migration we've ever had in this country by a really, really long way, actually. And that is, basically because we needed the Labour. And it's actually the case, actually, the government often boasts about growth being faster than certain European countries. The only reason that is because we're adding people faster than other countries because more people are moving here. Now that's great. That's more people having opportunities to come and live here. But it's not. Well, it's not that immigrants are making us poorer. It's that the increase in the population gives them an excuse to pretend we're not getting poorer because the overall economy has grown, but the per capita GDP has actually shrunk.
So, okay, 14 years of Tory reign or Tories in power. Yes, demonstrating they're not experts on economic stability. And now Labour's back. I mean, the Labour that I remember, of course, was not necessarily. I know less about Corbyn, but it was Blair, which I think probably led to the Tories in the first place. But let's talk. I wanted to talk more about what's going on now, but let's go to Kier Starmer. Let's go to what the Labour Party in the UK looks like now. Who is Keir? Is he really a progressive, or is he going to change now that he's in power, and there might be a grassroots pressure for him to actually get back to the Labour Party that once was? Or what do you make of? Explain him.
Yeah, so I mean, the super quick background is Kier Starmer, by all accounts, as a young man, was sort of like a socialist. Sort of that's on record. Then he had a very long and storied legal career. Some of it sort of defending quite interesting cases, defending people who'd sort of got sued by McDonald's and some striking workers here or there. Sort of had a somewhat interesting career. Then became director of public prosecutions, which is sort of the chief prosecutor in the country. That's how he got his knighthood. So he's Sir Keir, is how he's often described on the radio. You can call him Mr. Starmer or Sir Keir. But then he sort of came to power in the Labour Party by promising to be basically lots of the politics of Jeremy Corbyn, but in a nicer suit, and sort of more able to sell it because he's more of a conventional politician, more of a, he doesn't have the same history with Palestinian activists or Irish Republicans that sort of made life a little bit
trips to Cuba. Actually, I think a friend of mine was on one of those.
Exactly. So Kier Starmer doesn't have so many of those. He said, I can pitch a more sort of social democratic politics to the public. Turned out that was all a bit of a ruse. And then he made these 10 pledges. He abandoned most of them. Kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the party, of course. There had been sort of some people had suggested that maybe once he gets in power, he'll drop all of that. But actually just last week, in fact, he kicked out 7 left-wing members of the party, which is kind of unprecedented, MPs in Parliament. And that was because
also for voted alleged anti-Semitism? Sorry, tell me.
No, this one was actually, this one was because they objected to child poverty in this case. So under the Conservatives, they put a cap on the number of children who you can get child benefits for. So you get a certain amount of benefit each week if you get kids. Under the Conservatives, they say that's going to be capped at 2. So if you have 3 kids or 4 kids, then your 3rd and 4th kid isn't going to get that benefit. Now, sort of universally across the country, sort of every charity, the Church of England, Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, had all said Labour need to get rid of this 2-child cap because that will instantly lift a fair few people out of poverty.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in the election campaign kind of proved that we're tough and fiscally responsible because we're not going to get rid of this cap. 7
More
MPs
poor
last
children
week rebelled, and they were kicked out. So, which is actually tougher than Tony Blair when it comes to sort of hating on the left. Whether his politics, whether the policies he implements will be, a bit more social democratic than Tony Blair, still remains to be seen. But he's definitely not open to listening to the left of the party or the left.
What does it mean when you get kicked out of the party? Because Corbyn was still part of Labour, but what happens? You gotta go sit in the corner for a while?
Well, I should be a bit more specific here. So there's 2 things. An MP can get the whip suspended. I've never been quite sure why it's called a whip.
Yeah,
but if the whip is suspended,
sexual.
Yeah, it is very sexual, isn't it? You're still an MP, but you're now an independent MP. So you're not an MP for the Labour Party, but you can be an independent MP and a Labour Party member, which was the situation that Jeremy Corbyn was in for about 4 years, until they said you can't restand as an MP, and that's when he decided to go independent. And if you stand as an independent against a Labour candidate, then you get kicked out. So these 7 MPs who've been suspended, they're still Labour Party members. They don't have the whip. And basically the party has said, if we're going to check you out again in 6 months' time, and if you haven't rebelled between now and then, and if you've towed the line, and if you haven't said anything difficult, we'll let you back in. So it's basically to sort of say, we're watching you.
It's like a timeout. What does it mean you don't have the whip? Can they not vote, or they can't
So they can do everything that the other Labour. They can vote. They're still supposed to follow the whip. So following the whip means you're voting with the leadership.
Got it.
Basically, the leverage that the Labour leader has over MPs is whether or not at the next general election, they can stand as the Labour MP. Because obviously, if you
I
stand
see.
as the Labour MP in a Labour area, you're more likely to
To
be
win.
elected. If they
Right.
don't get the whip back, then it will be much more difficult for them to get re-elected in 5 years' time. So I think it's sort of setting the ground to try and scare MPs to say, if you don't vote with me, you won't be able to stand as a Labour MP at the next
Imagine
general election.
doing that over wanting to eliminate child poverty. That's just the saddest hill to die on, or what, or children that you're standing on to die on. But I want to actually ask you more about Corbyn. I didn't know that he had been kicked out of the Labour Party, and over especially these, like, I guess, allegations of anti-Semitism. Where does the British left stand on Corbyn? Now he's is going to be running as an independent. Is the consensus that he's been wronged? Is the consensus that he's kind of a Bernie Sanders and he had his moment and we kind of want to move on? What tell me your thoughts.
I mean, there's lots of different thoughts. So he did stand as an independent and he won. So I mean, one of the sort of attitudes around Jeremy Corbyn was that it felt a bit sad almost. He'd sort of come to this position as leader of the Labour Party, given a lot of people hope, brought a lot of interesting ideas, then been very much destroyed, not just as sort of like a politician, but also as a person to some degree. This is a guy who's sort of a bit of a, he's kind of like he wasn't the most strategic thinker. He's not like Bernie Sanders. When you listen to Bernie Sanders speak, you always know he's on point. He's sort of saying a similar thing that he always says, about sort of like the people against the elites, etc. There's lots of message discipline. With Corbyn, he's kind of all over the place, but he's sort of this sort of rambling, nice uncle who's always stood on the side of justice, etc. So this nice guy, and then he gets completely destroyed by the media and called, of all things, to be called, as Jeremy Corbyn, a racist. So it seemed just sort of sad. He was asking to be let back into the Labour Party, but he wasn't. But then I think there's been a real kind of emotional reset, which is because he stood as an independent in Islington North, which was his original constituency. Labour stood a candidate against him and threw loads of resources into it. Most people thought, or lots of people thought, the Labour candidate would win, but actually Jeremy Corbyn won by a really comfortable margin, which, it does seem like it's a much more just way, let's say, for him to, I don't want to say end his career, because I'm sure he's got some time ahead of him, but I don't think anyone thinks he's going to be sort of leading a left-wing political movement again. More that he's going to be this sort of figurehead who can represent movements, etc.
He's just still, he's still going to be a good pain in the ass, which is good, but he may not be like leading the next generation.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, he's probably always been most comfortable being a pain in the ass. That's another difference between him and Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders, I think, to stand in those presidential primaries, that was always very much like his idea and his project, whereas Jeremy Corbyn was kind of asked to stand to be Labour leader because no one else wanted to do it from the left of the party. So he was always kind of accidentally there. So him being back on the backbenches as an independent MP, being able to sort of stand up and say whatever he believes in, it's not the worst ending for the guy.
Right. Well, let me ask you about maybe a new beginning in Britain. Like what happens, as we saw in France, there was like a new coalition formed, and that, National Popular Front, and they won a majority of the seats, even though they kind of got fucked in like who's going to be prime minister. But can that happen I don't know, because we don't have a parliament. We just have two terrible parties. They're the same, but could, a new upsurge of, young, pissed off, like progressives who are tired, or like youth who are tired of whatever, not being able to make ends meet, band together and be like, we're doing a new party now. How difficult is that in the UK?
I mean, it is difficult. Sort of third parties generally haven't done particularly well, other than the Lib Dems, who is this sort of centrist in the middle party that, some people vote for when they're sort of, their ideology isn't that different to Labour or the Tories, but they're a bit annoyed at Labour or the Tories, so they vote for this kind of empty shell, this sort of empty signifier.
You guys don't even have like a small socialist like contingent in Parliament?
Well, so in Parliament at the moment, so at the general election, it was actually quite interesting because we had the Green Party, who've only ever had one MP. They quadrupled their number of MPs to 4. and something which absolutely no one saw coming, like no one in my organization, which is a left-wing media platform, saw this coming. I don't know of anyone, actually, no one told me this would happen, which is that 5 independents beat Labour incumbents, one of them being Jeremy Corbyn, but the other 4 were these relatively unknown people, most of them of Muslim background, standing in seats and with a high proportion of Muslim voters, and who were mobilizing on the issue of Gaza. So Kier Starmer
What? That's
upset.
huge.
Yeah, no, it's a very big deal. And literally that was probably the biggest surprise of the election night. And the election night for left-wingers was actually quite positive, because there had been a narrative, and the polls had been sort of suggesting that Labour would win just an absolute landslide. Everything in their path would just be completely obliterated. It turns out they won a big majority, because that's how our parliamentary system works, that you can win a big majority with not that many votes. But they only won 34% of the vote. And the reason they won is because the Conservatives did so badly, and the right-wing vote was split between the Conservatives and this populist right-wing party called Reform. But Labour lost a lot of votes to their left, a lot of votes to the Green Party, and a lot of votes to these pro-Gaza independents. And potentially that is one of the reasons why we've seen sort of Labour move a bit on the Gaza issue. They're incredibly hawkish, very pro-Israel over the past few months. They've now sounded a little bit tougher, not massively, but a little bit tougher. So
yeah, let me ask you
there
about
can
that.
be pressure from outside the party.
I mean, well, look, a little bit tougher in our world in the United States is, I'm over here like salivating over Kamala Harris, meeting with a Palestinian. Just like, heaven forbid we meet with
Kamala
a guy
Harris
who wants
saying, right. She just says it's sad that children are dying, and everyone's like, wow, she's so compassionate.
Yeah, she said suffering, like, damn, no, it's true. It's true. So there's 3 big pieces of news coming out just this week that Britain may do 3 things. One is suspending any export licenses for weapon sales to Israel. It hasn't been announced yet. The second is dropping the challenge to the ICC's arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant of Israel. And the third is restoring, which I think has been announced, restoring funding to UNRWA, the relief agency that operates in Gaza. These are huge things. Just give me your reaction.
Yeah, well, I suppose the weapon sales is the most significant one, and potentially the most complicated one. So we'll start with UNRWA, actually, because I think that is the one which, as far as I understand, the United States now is really the only country in the world that's still withholding funding from UNRWA. So most of the European countries had already restored funding to UNRWA, so UNRWA being the aid agency to Palestinians. I think that was always just so outrageous that we ever went along with that ruse. Israel sort of announced, it was the day after the International Court of Justice had said that Israel is plausibly committing a genocide. And then Israel said, UNRWA are Hamas. And then suddenly the United States, the UK, Germany, everyone sort of said, oh, maybe UNRWA are Hamas. And so withdrew the funding. Labour have now brought back the funding. But it's always, I think here, one of the most tepid demands when it comes to Gaza has always been get aid into Gaza, because you're not, obviously I want aid to get into Gaza, but the real issue is that you've got Israel bombing Gaza, and aid into Gaza is one of these sort of like nice things that people can say without actually putting any pressure on the country that's causing the humanitarian crisis in the first place. So yeah, restoring funding to UNRWA, good, but I would say minimal. The ICC issue, again, I would say good, but minimal. Like the idea that we were going to the ICC to specifically say, do not investigate Netanyahu. We're a member of the ICC. I think that was partly because the United States had asked us to do that. The United States not a member of the International Criminal Court.
We are not a member.
We were going to do their dirty work within the organization. So thankfully, Labour have now said, we're not going to do that. Kier Starmer is a lawyer, so they can sort of use this line. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was also a lawyer, so they can say, we need to let the law take its course. The arms sales is the most interesting one, because that would be a big deal. It's not the case that sort of everyone has now stopped selling arms to Israel, and we're just following, obviously not the Americans, you're exceptional when it comes to this, but I don't think lots of our European neighbors have necessarily stopped sending arms to Israel. So that would be a big deal. There are some caveats. One, they've said, we won't send offensive weapons, but we will send defensive weapons.
Now, this line, like, what are you talking about?
Offense and defense is somewhat blurry. A weapon system that can defend your country is, well, also, because Israel will say that everything they do is defense. But interestingly, also 4 hours before now, so about 4 hours ago, just this evening, it's now being reported that Labour are not going to stop suspending or are not going to suspend arms sales for a while, for a few weeks, because Israel has decided that they want to bomb Lebanon now as well. And presumably we're
Just
saying,
let
oh,
them
if
start a regional
they
war.
want to do Lebanon. Yeah, we'll stop suspending the arms, but only after they've started World War III, which is sort of the incredibly sort of galaxy brain take of the Labour Party right now.
Jeez. Yeah. I mean, you know, as a, you know, in Europe where there actually was fascism, and, you know, there obviously the, you know, Germany is its own thing when it comes to just how Zionist they are because of their history. And how, you know, I think it's very clear that, I mean, Joe Biden's ideological commitment to Zionism is also so clearly laden with the same, well, if we don't do this, then suddenly we are Nazis or we are Holocaust deniers, or this is the mea culpa for this one Holocaust is to allow a second Holocaust on the people of Palestine. But I feel like it's much more tangible in Europe. And I also think the anti-Semitism claims maybe have more traction in Europe too, because there was real anti-Semitism, whereas in the United States, we've not had like pogroms and we've not had, you know, Holocaust. Our anti-Semitism has never been structural outside of like certain country clubs that Jews can't join, you know, so it's a different organizing. Arguably, we should have an easier time in this country organizing our government against them. But I am curious, do the kids on TikTok in England like talk about the British mandate and shit and like take responsibility and are like, yeah, we gotta remember we fucked up with the British mandate? And, like, is that a thing?
No, that is a big talking point. I have to admit, sometimes people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the guy from TikTok," because we have a social media person at Novara that uploads stuff to TikTok. I'm like, I've never been on TikTok. I mean, I think I've uploaded 4 things to TikTok. I still don't quite understand the interface.
Well, they must have been
but no,
good.
we do have lots of people that talk, and rightly talk, about Britain's responsibility for the crisis, because Britain was the imperial power and promised various bits of land to different people, and sort of it ended up being a real mess.
A real oopsie. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.